I arrived in the town of Kivalina with nothing but a duffel bag and a vague hope of escape. The town, perched on the jagged edge of Alaska's northwest coast, seemed almost abandoned, though its streets were meticulously plowed and the buildings leaned against the wind with stoic stubbornness. I had left everything behind: a failed marriage, unpaid bills, the hollow echo of a career I could no longer stomach. The police department here had advertised a quiet post, a place to start fresh, and I had answered without hesitation. The station was a squat building of gray cinder block, smelling faintly of salt and old pine. Inside, the warmth was deceptive. Officer Madsen, the sergeant who had hired me, waited behind a steel desk cluttered with clipboards and unmarked folders. His face was sharp, thin-lipped, with eyes that held both calculation and something colder, almost patient. He offered no handshake, just a folder. "This is your guide," he said. The words were flat, almost clinical. "Memorize it, obey it, never question it." I flipped the folder open, expecting a standard employee manual. Instead, it contained a list, 12 rules, precise and odd. 1. Never illuminate a window after midnight. 2. When the wind howls from the northeast, speak only in short, unbroken sentences. 3. Do not step on the cracks of the main street between the church and the general store. 4. When a stranger offers bread, refuse with a shake of the head, never a word. 5. Ignore your reflection at exactly 2:17 a.m., but do not look away. 6. When the fog rolls in, count to 13 before opening doors. 7. Always replace a fallen fence post before sunset, regardless of weather. 8. Never whistle near the old well at the edge of town. 9. If a cat crosses your path thrice before breakfast, walk backward home. 10. Avoid naming the winds. Refer only to their direction. 11. Respond to the telephone only once per day, at noon. 12. At precisely 3:33 a.m., stand outside in silence for 30 seconds. I skimmed them, half amused, half nervous. He watched me carefully, expression unreadable. Each rule is non-negotiable. Following them is for your safety. Breaking them will have consequences. Understand? I nodded, the folder already feeling heavier in my hands than the duffel bag at my feet. My first night in Kivalina passed without incident, the wind groaning like a wounded animal outside my small, wood-paneled apartment. At precisely 2:17 a.m., I followed the instructions for Rule 5. I stared into the cracked mirror above the sink, feeling the chill of something unnatural pressing against the glass. For a moment, my reflection hesitated, lagged, and then smiled. I did not. The next morning, the town appeared unchanged, utterly mundane. Children trudged through snowdrifts to school. The grocer stacked his shelves with practiced precision. I told no one of the reflection, though my mind replayed the event with obsessive detail. By noon, I picked up the single aloud call, a static-laden line that spoke only in a tone flat, devoid of warmth, repeating a single phrase: "The Northeast remembers." I tried to dismiss it as exhaustion, the residual fear of isolation in the Arctic night, but the rules were already carving grooves in my behavior. I avoided the cracked streets, replaced a fence post at the edge of the wharf, and kept my gaze off mirrors. I noticed the fog settling heavier than the forecast predicted, and the wind had shifted northeast again, carrying a taste of something metallic and wrong. That evening, I was leaving the station after a late inspection when a shadow moved across the street ahead of me, brief, silent, and impossible. I froze. The street was empty, yet I felt the same unnatural awareness prickling at the edges of perception. The shadow retreated, and the snow beneath it remained untouched, unbroken. No footprints, no disturbance. I blinked, convinced my mind had played tricks, and yet somewhere in the back of my mind, a single thought echoed, insistent and cold. I had not broken any rules. I returned to my apartment, the rules tucked under my arm. The wind clawed at the windows, the fog pressed closer, and for the first time, the weight of the folder felt less like guidance and more like a lifeline. I did not sleep. I could not. Something in Kivalina was watching, waiting, and I was certain it had already noticed me. The rules were simple, specific, absurd, but their purpose was no longer a question. It was a promise. Follow them. Survive. fail, and reality itself might unravel before me. And when I closed my eyes, I could still see that reflection, grinning where I should have been. Word count 963. Next chapter will explore my growing paranoia, the small ways rules manipulate perception, and the first direct confrontation with inexplicable phenomena. The morning arrived gray and brittle, the horizon a sliver of dim light against the endless ice. I moved through the town methodically, obeying each rule with an almost ritualistic precision. The cracked street underfoot seemed to hum faintly as I skirted its fractures, and each step carried a weight I could not name. Madsen's words echoed in my head, non-negotiable, consequences. I did not yet understand what consequences meant, only that disobedience was unthinkable. The wind had shifted again, northeast, slicing through layers of clothing with a sharp, cold insistence. I spoke only in short, clipped sentences, counting them silently, rehearsing them like a spell. The fog crept along the buildings, curling around corners and seeping into the shadows as if it had intent. I counted to 13 before opening any doors, though each time my fingers trembled on the latch. There was a subtle resistance, an almost liquid hesitation that made the hinges groan. I went to the wharf to check the fence post. It had fallen in the night. Snow had packed around the broken wood, and I could see faint, irregular impressions leading to it. Footprints that were too long, too straight, unbroken by the drift. I replaced the post with deliberate care, hammering in the nails until my knuckles bled. The wind shifted, a pressure that pressed against my ears, whispering in tones I could not identify. I did not speak. I did not breathe more than necessary. The town seemed unchanged, orderly, obedient to some unseen hand. People moved with the quiet efficiency of those who had been trained to follow rules they did not question. A woman passed me on the street carrying a basket, pausing for a moment to glance at the sky, then at the cracked pavement, and quickly lowered her gaze. She moved past me without acknowledgement. I wondered if she too followed the rules, if she too understood the significance of cracks, winds, and mirrors. By mid-afternoon, the telephone rang once, exactly at noon. I answered, my hand shaking, hearing the same metallic monotone. The Northeast remembers. I asked nothing, received no further communication, and hung up quickly, as instructed. The phrase lingered, sticking to the back of my throat, a residue of sound that seemed to vibrate through the walls and under the snow. When I returned to my apartment, the mirror above the sink reflected a room empty and still. I forced myself to stare, resisting the instinct to look away, though my reflection again lingered a fraction behind my movements. I noticed a subtle distortion, a line of shadow that did not belong, drifting along the edge of the frame, curling toward me, then retracting when I blinked. The rules had instructed me not to turn away. I obeyed, my stomach tightening with every second. Night fell quickly. The wind intensified, carrying a scent of iron and frost that clung to my skin. I walked the perimeter of the town, avoiding cracks and observing the shadows, counting each step and each exhale. I could not shake the sense of being measured, observed, even when no one was visible. Shapes formed in the fog, dissolving as soon as I focused on them. Once, a cat crossed my path thrice before dawn. I walked backward as instructed, and the fog seemed to pulse in response, shifting with my movements. Later, I noticed the well at the edge of town. It was a stone circle of ancient, blackened brick, frost-lined and ominous. I did not whistle. I did not breathe more than necessary. A faint noise reached me from below, a dripping, rhythmic, almost human pulse, and I recoiled, yet kept my distance, as though acknowledging it might provoke attention. Back in the apartment, I found the air thicker than it should have been. My own breathing sounded amplified, alien, echoing against walls that should have been familiar. The reflection in the mirror moved independently once more, this time stepping forward, stopping just short of the glass, its eyes darker than any human's. I had obeyed all the rules, and yet it approached. The hairs on my arms stood on end. I could not look away. A sound came from the hallway outside my door, a scrape, subtle but deliberate. My pulse jumped. I could not see anything through the frosted glass of the peephole, but the noise persisted, a slow, measured drag, coming closer, stopping, then retreating. My hands gripped the folder of rules, each page a brittle shield against the unknown. I considered the simplicity of the instructions, the absurd specificity, and felt a shiver of understanding. They were not guidelines, not even suggestions. They were barriers. Something outside was testing them, testing me. My reflection smiled again, a slow, deliberate curling of lips that mirrored nothing I had done. I forced my eyes to the rules, whispered them to myself, counting steps, breaths, and seconds. The wind clawed at the windows with a sound that resembled whispered counting, the fog pressing against the walls, the shadows curling closer. And when I finally dared to glance at the hallway again, the scrape had stopped, but the faintest footprint had appeared in the snow outside my door. It was too long, too narrow, impossibly fresh. I did not sleep. I sat, eyes fixed on the mirror, listening to the wind, listening to the silence that was anything but empty. The rules were absurd, unnatural, yet they were all I had. Somewhere beyond the fog, the Northeast remembered, and I understood that tonight was only the beginning. The air felt alive, attentive, and patient. And when the reflection lifted its hand as if to beckon me forward, I did not move. I only obeyed. The folder rested in my lap, a fragile armor, and I repeated each rule over and over, my voice trembling, my mind sharpening with the realization that ignorance was no longer an option. The town was a cage, the rules were the locks, and whatever waited in the fog, whatever mirrored me with intent and malice, was testing the strength of both. The northeast wind screamed against the walls, and I sat in the dark, counting, waiting, and silently acknowledging that obedience might not be enough. The next morning, Madsen found me sitting at my desk in the station, still wearing the same clothes as the night before. He didn't ask why. His eyes flicked once to the frost clinging to my collar, then to my hands trembling over the open folder. He poured 2 cups of coffee, handed me one, and said, almost casually, "You made it through the second night. Most people don't." I didn't answer. The smell of the coffee felt wrong. Bitter, metallic, like blood left too long in the cold. Madsen sat across from me, his expression unreadable. "You'll learn to listen," he said. "The rules aren't protection, they're negotiation." He leaned forward, his voice lowering to a whisper. "We don't stop it, we only buy time." Before I could respond, he slid a new page across the desk. "Updates," he said. There were 3 additions. 13, never respond to your name if it's spoken from outside after dark. 14, do not write or read names on the memorial wall behind the church. 15, if you dream of the sea, wake yourself before the tide reaches your knees. He tapped the paper with 1 finger. You'll need these soon. The rest of the day passed in slow, deliberate movements. I patrolled the narrow streets, noting how the town's rhythm followed something older than routine. No one lingered outside after dusk. Curtains stayed drawn even in daylight. The general store's clock was stuck perpetually at 12, and no one bothered to fix it. Near the edge of town, the snow thickened, covering the world in blinding silence. I reached the memorial wall just as the light began to fade. It stood behind the small wooden church, a black stone slab half buried by frost. The names carved there shimmered faintly as though wet. My eyes lingered on one before I caught myself. The letters twisted, rearranged, then vanished. I turned away quickly, heart hammering, the rules warning echoing in my mind. When I returned to the station, the air inside felt denser, almost liquid. A radio crackled faintly, though no one had turned it on. Through the static, a voice whispered my name. Soft, familiar, coaxing. I froze. The rule was clear: never respond. I stood motionless, staring at the radio as the voice repeated itself a little louder, a little more insistent. It was my own voice. I turned the radio off, pulled the plug from the wall, but the whisper continued, faint and steady, vibrating through the desk. Madsen appeared in the doorway, his face pale. He said nothing, only nodded once, then closed the office door behind him. The whisper stopped instantly. The silence that followed felt like something holding its breath. That night, the sea entered my dreams. I was standing ankle-deep in dark water, the moon a single unblinking eye above the waves. Shapes moved beneath the surface, too large, too close. The tide rose to my knees, then higher. I remembered the rule, tried to wake, but my body refused to move. I screamed soundlessly, watching the horizon split open like a wound. Something vast stirred beneath the ice. I woke gasping, my throat raw. My room smelled of brine and decay. The sheets were wet, not with sweat. Cold, salty water pooled around me, soaking the mattress. The clock read 3:33 a.m. I stood, shaking, and stepped outside as the rule demanded. The wind was dead. The sky had no stars. The town lay utterly still, snow untouched, except for a single line of prints stretching down the street. They weren't mine. They were bare, long, and deep, as though made by something that weighed far more than any human. They led straight to my door and stopped there. I followed them with my eyes, my breath fogging the air, but they ended abruptly at the threshold. Nothing had entered, yet something had been there. Across the street, the fog pulsed faintly, rhythmic, alive. I thought I saw movement inside it, a figure tall and wrong, limbs bending against logic, head tilting as if listening. I didn't move. The wind shifted again, a whisper sliding through the trees, and the figure dissolved into mist. Behind me, inside the apartment, the radio clicked on. My voice spoke again, quiet but clear. "You shouldn't have looked." I turned, heart hammering, staring through the window at my own reflection. It was standing behind the glass, inside the room, smiling faintly. I stood outside, staring at myself, understanding only that one of us was no longer real. I didn't go back in. I stood there until dawn, the cold burrowing deep into my bones, repeating the rules over and over until the wind finally carried the words away. The dawn was thin and gray, slipping over the jagged horizon in pale streaks. I returned to the station in silence, each step measured, avoiding cracks, counting them under my breath. The snow was undisturbed, the town appearing exactly as it had the night before, yet every shadow seemed stretched, every corner heavier than reason allowed. I could feel the weight of eyes, invisible but insistently present, watching my every movement. Madsen met me in the hallway, expression unreadable. He didn't speak, only handed me a thermos and gestured toward the back room where new reports were waiting. The files were mundane, missing snowmobiles, a wandering husky, a burnt generator. But each report carried a subtle tension, a pattern I could not yet articulate. The town was small enough for me to know that nothing disappeared without notice. The anomalies had rules behind them, hidden in plain sight. I followed the patrol route, enforcing the rules mechanically. I counted steps on the cracked street, avoided the old well, replaced a fallen fence post near the wharf. The fog rolled in thicker than forecast, curling around my boots and wrists, rising from the ground like living smoke. I remembered Madsen's warning: the rules are not protection, only negotiation. At the edge of the pier, I saw a cat, black and thin, moving in unnatural silence. It crossed my path thrice before the sun had fully risen. I walked backward as instructed. The fog reacted, swirling, pulsing, almost expectant, as if testing my obedience. Behind me, the footprints of the cat seemed elongated, stretching impossibly across the snow, vanishing before reaching the next step. Inside the station, the clock was still stuck at 12. I noticed the hands tremble faintly, like the pulse of something alive. The radio clicked on without warning, whispering fragments of voices, unintelligible but urgent. I looked at the folder, repeating the rules silently, fingers tracing the paper's edge as if the ink could anchor reality. The mirror above the break room sink reflected a figure that hesitated, lagged behind my movements, tilting its head unnaturally. Its eyes were too dark, pupils dilated to an impossible size, and when I stepped closer, it smiled. Not at me, but at something in the room I could not see. I obeyed. I did not turn away. At noon, the telephone rang. 1 call per day, the rule said. I answered, voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. A metallic tone, almost a hiss, said, "The Northeast counts." Then, silence. My own voice, faint and disembodied, echoed behind the receiver, "You are not ready." I left the station before the wind shifted again, walking through streets that should have been familiar, now alien. Shadows leaned against walls with impossible angles, stretching across corners, pooling in ways that defied light. I glimpsed the memorial wall behind the church and stopped. Names shimmered faintly, rearranging in a slow, deliberate dance. I forced myself to turn away, obeying the rule I barely understood. By late afternoon, the fog thickened to a near solid presence. I reached the old well at the edge of town. It was impossible to see the bottom. The air smelled of iron and wet stone. I did not whistle. I did not speak. The shadows seemed to rise from the depths, curling upward like smoke, thought writhing just beyond comprehension. Returning to my apartment, I found the water in the sink moving slightly, ripples forming without disturbance. My reflection stepped out of the mirror slowly, stopping in the middle of the room. I could not breathe, could not move, but I repeated the rules silently, counting my steps, my heartbeats, the seconds. Outside, the wind howled from the northeast, carrying faint laughter that was not human. The fog pressed against the windows like living fingers. I saw movement at the edge of my vision, something tall, thin, bending impossibly, walking parallel to me through the snow. I obeyed, keeping to the cracked path, counting each step, refusing to look directly. Night fell, black and absolute. At 3:33 a.m., I stepped outside as the rules demanded. The snow beneath my boots was untouched except for a single trail leading away from the apartment. It twisted unnaturally, sometimes straight, sometimes curved against logic, ending in the fog beyond the town's edge. The air pulsed, each gust a whisper, each shadow a pulse of intent. Inside, the radio whispered fragments of my own thoughts back to me. My reflection lingered in the window, smiling wider than possible, lifting a hand to beckon. I did not move. I obeyed. The rules pressed against me, rigid and precise. A thin shield against a world that no longer adhered to logic or reason. I understood now that survival required more than obedience. It required vigilance, an unbroken awareness, a willingness to exist in a reality that was slipping, bending, testing me at every step. The northeast wind screamed against the walls, carrying something alive, patient and ancient. I counted, waited, and obeyed, knowing that the world outside my own perception had already begun to change, and that whatever watched me would not relent. By the fourth day, the town no longer felt real. The air itself carried a texture, grainy, thick, as though I was breathing through the skin of something sleeping just beneath the snow. My body moved automatically, muscle memory shaped by fear and routine. Every rule I followed had become instinct. Every breath was measured. Madsen avoided me that morning. He sat in his office with the blinds drawn, staring at something behind his desk that I couldn't see. When I knocked, he only said, "It's too early. Don't speak." I obeyed, though the clock on the wall read 10. The silence stretched. Outside, the sky had darkened to the color of old bruises, and the snow fell in slow, spiraling flakes that didn't melt when they touched the window. They lingered, quivering faintly before evaporating all at once. I left the station and followed the narrow road that wound past the church, my footsteps muffled in the deepening drifts. The memorial wall loomed again. I felt its pull before I saw it. The black surface shimmered beneath a thin crust of frost, and from a distance it almost appeared to breathe. I stopped, remembering the rule, forcing myself to look away. Yet I could still see the reflection of movement within the polished stone, figures shifting in silence, walking backward, dissolving into shadow. As I turned to leave, a sound cut through the wind. My name, whispered once faintly from behind me. My pulse stopped. The rule was clear: never respond to your name after dark. But the sun was still visible, a dim orange sliver over the ice. I hesitated. The voice came again, closer now, softer, carrying an edge of familiarity that made my stomach twist. It was my father's voice. I hadn't heard it in years, not since before he died. I froze, staring straight ahead, refusing to turn. My breath clouded the air, trembling. The voice shifted tone, lower, patient, like something studying how I would react. Then silence. I forced myself to count to 13 before opening the door to the nearest building. Inside, the cold followed me, pressing against my spine. It was the old supply shed, unused, filled with the smell of rust and dust. The light through the window was pale, watery. I stood there until the trembling in my hands stopped. That evening, Madsen called me into his office. He looked worse. Skin pale, eyes sunken, lips dry. "You heard it, didn't you?" he said quietly. I didn't answer. He nodded anyway, as though I had confirmed it. "It's not them," he said. "It just sounds like them. It remembers who you were." He handed me another paper, shaking slightly. 16. Write it down. 16. If you hear someone you love calling you, leave immediately. Do not look back. I folded the note carefully, sliding it into the folder. Madsen's hands pressed flat on the desk. "We were never supposed to stay this long," he said. "The rules don't stop it anymore. They only slow it down." He stood, opened the blinds, and for the first time I saw what lay beyond the station windows. The fog had thickened into something tangible, a solid wall crawling toward the town from the coastline. Within it, faint shapes moved, tall, thin, bending in ways that made my stomach revolt. Their silhouettes shimmered like heat distortion, impossible angles folding into themselves. The sound came next, a low hum that resonated in my ribs. Madsen closed the blinds slowly. "You'll start to see them more often. Don't acknowledge them. Don't name them. Don't describe them aloud." His voice trembled once, then steadied. "If you do, it notices you directly." That night, the fog reached the first row of houses. I could hear it pressing against walls, sliding between window frames. The wind had died, but something still moved in the air, an invisible pulse that shifted with my heartbeat. At 3:33 a.m., I stepped outside as always. The sky above was gone. No stars, no moon, just an expanse of colorless dark. The snow was smooth, untouched, except for a series of prints leading from the fog to the door of my apartment. Bare, elongated, and glistening faintly, as if the ice itself had been rearranged to form their shape. I followed them with my eyes, but not my feet. The prints stopped 2 feet from where I stood, abruptly. Something had been there, then simply ceased. The silence that followed was complete. Then, faintly, the whisper returned. My father's voice again, now from the other side of the door behind me. "Son," it said, quiet, pleading. "You can come home now." I didn't turn. I didn't breathe. The rules pulsed through my head in rhythm with my heartbeat. When I finally looked toward the reflection in the window, I saw my own face staring back. But behind it, barely visible, a second outline forming, smiling faintly, pressing against the glass from within. I stayed there until dawn, repeating the rules over and over until the voice faded. The fog remained. It always did. By the 5th day, the town had fallen into an impossible rhythm. The light never fully changed anymore. It hovered in a dim state between dusk and dawn, bleeding across the horizon like a bruise that refused to heal. I moved through the streets as though sleepwalking, every step choreographed by dread. The rules weren't just instructions now. They were the only language left that reality seemed to understand. Madsen didn't show up to the station that morning. His office door was closed, the blinds drawn tight. A faint smell leaked from under the door, something like burnt hair and wet copper. I didn't knock. I didn't call his name. I remembered the 13th rule and walked away, pretending not to hear the faint scraping sound that came from inside. The logbook on the front desk contained a new entry, written in Madsen's precise, angular handwriting. It was dated the previous night. "It's getting closer. The wind isn't the wind anymore." That was all. I spent the day patrolling, though patrol had become meaningless. The streets were nearly empty. The people I did see moved strangely, too smoothly, as if gliding just above the snow. They didn't look at me. Some didn't blink. When I passed the church, its door was open and a low humming echoed from within, a single sustained tone that made the fillings in my teeth vibrate. Inside, the pews were empty except for one figure sitting near the front, head bowed. The air felt heavy, thick with something that didn't belong. I approached slowly. The figure turned. It was Madsen, or something wearing his face. The skin around his mouth was split in symmetrical lines, and his eyes were the color of shallow seawater. "You're late," it said. The voice was Madsen's, but layered, like two people speaking at once. The Northeast doesn't forgive lateness. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the pew. It smiled at me, wide and deliberate. Then it folded in on itself. Not fell, not vanished, but collapsed inward like a reflection curling into glass. The sound that followed was a low, wet sigh that made my stomach twist. I ran, slamming the church door behind me. The wind had picked up again. I could feel it whispering across my neck, words forming and dissolving too quickly to understand. I remembered what Madsen had said. Don't name them, don't describe them. I bit my tongue to keep from speaking. The snow under my boots pulsed once, faintly like a heartbeat. That evening, the rules seemed to change on their own. The ink on the page shimmered faintly when I opened the folder, and new lines had appeared beneath the 15th. I hadn't written them. 16. If a door knocks by itself, open it only halfway. 17. Should you see yourself standing outside, do not invite it in. 18. When the sea speaks, you must answer only once. I stared at them for a long time, my fingers numb. The paper was damp, the edges curling inward. When I set it down, the words seemed to shift, reordering themselves subtly, like water disturbed by wind. That night I dreamed of the sea again. This time, I was waist-deep in black water, the waves perfectly still. The horizon pulsed faintly, as if something massive were breathing beneath it. I felt movement below me, slow, circular. When I looked down, the water was clear enough to see shapes turning just below my feet. Elongated limbs, jointed wrong, curling upward in patient rhythm. A voice rose from the surface, whispering through the stillness. You follow the rules, it said. Good. That means you belong to them. I woke choking, the taste of salt thick in my mouth. My floor was slick with water again, rippling under a wind that didn't exist. I turned on the light. My reflection stood in the mirror, but this time it didn't mimic me. It tilted its head, slowly, unnaturally, as though studying me. A knock came from the door. Once, then again, then a third time, slower. I froze, staring at the wood. The rules burned in my mind. Open it only halfway. My hand trembled as I turned the handle, easing it open just enough to see the narrow slice of night beyond. Something stood there. Tall, thin, featureless, except for the faint impression of a face stretched too far, eyes like deep pits of ice. It tilted its head to the same angle as my reflection had. The cold air spilled into the room, thick and heavy, and I heard the faint rush of waves in the distance. I closed the door slowly, locked it, and stepped back. My reflection smiled faintly, matching the creature's tilt. The air vibrated almost imperceptibly, as though the two were speaking to each other in a language I couldn't hear. When the sound stopped, I realized the folder on the table had changed again. A single new line had appeared beneath the rest. 19. Do not let it see you writing this. I stared at the page until my vision blurred. The ink shimmered faintly, as if breathing. And somewhere outside, beyond the fog, something began to knock again. Slow, deliberate, patient. By the 6th day, the town no longer made sense. The streets didn't align the way they used to. When I turned a corner, I would sometimes find myself facing the same building I'd just left, the same mailbox, the same frozen trail of my own footprints looping in on themselves. The compass on my wrist refused to settle. Its needle jittered in erratic, feverish spasms. I stopped trusting direction. I stopped trusting time. The clocks all read differently now. At the station, the frozen dial still pointed at 12. At the church, it was 9:09. My watch flickered between 3:33 and 2:17, both times already etched into the rules. When I tried to wind it, it resisted, vibrating faintly as though alive. Madsen's office door was open. The smell was stronger, brine, iron, rot. Inside, the walls were covered with sketches, crude and frantic, drawn in what looked like rust or dried blood. Circles within circles, lines crossing into shapes that hurt to look at. I recognized parts of the map of Kivalina embedded in the designs, twisted and rearranged, the streets forming a pattern that resembled a vast spiraling eye. His chair was empty, but the radio on his desk hissed faintly. When I approached, the static coalesced into a whisper, a rhythm of breaths that almost formed words. I leaned closer. The voice came through clearly, my own voice. "It's behind the glass now," it said. "Don't move." I turned slowly toward the window. Frost had formed patterns there, branching in intricate filigree across the glass. Behind it, barely visible, a pale shape pressed forward. A face, featureless except for the suggestion of depth where eyes should have been. It didn't move. It didn't blink. The frost around it pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat. I backed out of the office and shut the door quietly, reverently, as though closing a coffin. Outside, the air had changed again. The wind no longer felt like air at all. It carried weight, substance, a vibration that resonated through my bones. The snow didn't fall anymore. It rose in slow spirals from the ground, drifting upward toward a sky that refused to stay still. I could see faint movement within the fog, as if something vast and distant were pacing in circles just beyond the edge of perception. At noon, the telephone rang. 1 call per day. I answered. The line was silent for a moment, then filled with a steady, low breathing. Finally, a voice spoke. "Stop writing." The sound was soft, almost kind, familiar, my own again. "Stop writing," it repeated. "It doesn't like when you write. It sees through the words." I dropped the receiver. The hum of the wind outside shifted pitch, a subtle but definite change, like attention being redirected. I stood motionless, staring at the folder on the desk. Rule 19 glistened faintly on the page. "Do not let it see you writing this." The walls seemed to breathe. The floor swelled gently beneath my boots, rising and falling in slow rhythm. The station's lights flickered, dimmed, then went out entirely. I moved toward the door, counting steps, whispering the rules under my breath, each word a small act of faith. When I reached the street, the fog parted just enough for me to see the coastline. The sea had crept closer than it should have. The tide was rising, but the water didn't move naturally. It pulsed, expanding and contracting, as though the ocean itself were inhaling. Shapes moved beneath the surface, long, jointed, graceful in their impossibility. They didn't swim, they climbed, ascending the air like smoke. I ran, not fast, not wildly, just steady, deliberate, counting each footfall, whispering the rules like prayer. My reflection followed me in the windows I passed, but not in sync anymore. It moved slower, its mouth open in a silent scream that never reached me. By the time I reached my apartment, the knocking had already started again. 3 times, then silence, then 3 more. I pressed my back to the door and waited. The knocking grew louder, sharper, until I felt the vibrations through the wood. Then it stopped. The silence that followed was worse. The air was dense, charged, filled with something close to anticipation. I risked a glance through the peephole. The hallway was empty, but the light was wrong, slightly too dim, slightly too yellow. When I looked again, there was someone standing there. Me. He, or it, was motionless, head tilted, eyes wide and glassy. His clothes were the same, but darker, soaked through with something that dripped soundlessly onto the floor. I could see the condensation forming around his lips each time he exhaled. He smiled slowly, then leaned forward until his eye filled the peephole. I stumbled back, heart slamming against my ribs. Outside, he began to knock again. Once, twice. Then a slow dragging of fingernails down the wood. I pressed my hands to my ears. The sound continued, not from the door anymore, but from the inside walls. Soft, patient tapping from behind the plaster, tracing the outline of the room. I didn't sleep that night. I sat with the folder open, the words shimmering faintly in the dark, whispering themselves over and over like an incantation. Somewhere beyond the fog, beyond the rules, something enormous and ancient waited, pressing closer with each breath. And in the reflection of the window, I saw myself still standing outside, smiling faintly, waiting for me to open the door. By the 7th day, the town was empty. No footprints in the snow except mine. No plumes of smoke from the chimneys. The station door hung half open, swaying lightly with the wind, but inside every trace of Madsen was gone. His desk cleared, his chair pushed in neatly as though he had never existed. Only the faint smell of brine remained, clinging to the paper of the rule sheet like rot. I read the rules again, slowly, letting each one carve itself into my mind. Rule 1. Never go outside after dusk unless the siren has stopped. Rule 13. Never respond to your name if it's spoken from outside after dark. Rule 15. If you dream of the sea, wake yourself before the tide reaches your knees. The ink on the page rippled faintly as I stared. The paper wasn't wet. It was breathing. At noon, I checked the town perimeter. The fog no longer circled the edges. It had swallowed everything beyond. The road leading out was gone, replaced by an expanse of gray-white haze that absorbed sound. My radio hissed weakly, then died. I tossed it aside and kept walking. Half a mile north of the station, the air grew thick. The snow beneath my boots softened like flesh. I crouched and touched it. It gave slightly under my glove, then pulsed. Something moved beneath the surface, slow and rhythmic, like lungs drawing breath. I backed away, following the prints I'd left behind, but they were gone. The snow had sealed over them completely. The landscape around me was uniform and empty. The fog began to close in. That's when I heard the siren. It didn't sound distant anymore. It was coming from everywhere, vibrating through the air, shaking the fillings in my teeth. I fell to my knees, pressing my hands over my ears. The tone fluctuated, rising and falling like a living voice trying to imitate the memory of a warning. Beneath it, another sound began to emerge, a chorus of wet, dragging movements, hundreds of limbs shifting just beyond the veil. I ran. The siren cut off abruptly, leaving only my heartbeat and the crunch of snow. I didn't know which direction led back to town, but the fog ahead began to thin slightly, revealing the outline of the memorial wall behind the church. Something had changed. The wall was taller now, almost double its height. The names had multiplied, covering every inch of black stone, layered so thick they overlapped like scales. The newest inscription was still wet, the letters shimmering faintly in the gray light. My name. Each line of the letters twisted subtly as I looked at them, like worms beneath translucent skin. I reached forward despite myself, fingertips trembling. The stone was warm. Beneath my hand, the surface pulsed once in perfect time with my heartbeat. Behind me, footsteps crunched in the snow. I turned slowly. Madsen stood there, or something wearing his shape. His uniform was soaked, his eyes too wide, his pupils expanding and contracting like breathing holes. He smiled without recognition. "You shouldn't have come here," he said. His voice was two voices layered together, one human, one low and resonant, vibrating the air. I stepped back, my hand still against the wall. He tilted his head. "You've been writing," he said. "It knows you now." The wind picked up suddenly, with Hop carrying with it a deep, subsonic groan from the sea. The church bell began to toll, slow, uneven strikes echoing through the frozen air. Madsen, or what wore his face, stepped closer. "Do you hear it?" he asked. "That's not metal, that's bone." I turned and ran toward the station, but every street was wrong again. Buildings rearranged themselves in the fog, corners bent into loops. My reflection appeared in every window I passed, not matching my movements anymore. It stood still as I ran, watching, its eyes black and bottomless. When I finally reached the station, the front door was locked. I had never locked it. The glass panes were opaque from the inside, as though filled with smoke. I slammed my shoulder against it, once, twice, until it gave way. Inside, the radio was on. The static was louder than before, dense and layered, voices whispering through it in fragments. My handwriting filled the desk blotter, though I didn't remember writing any of it. The words spiraled across the page in looping, frantic repetition. "Don't look at the sky. Don't look at the sky. Don't look at the sky." I froze. Outside, through the cracked window, something vast was moving above the town, visible only as distortions in the clouds, like ripples spreading across glass. The siren began again, softer this time, almost mournful. Then, the sky opened, not like clouds parting, more like a wound tearing itself wider. The fog recoiled from it, revealing a vast black expanse that wasn't space, wasn't night, something deeper, older, infinite. The town seemed to tilt toward it, every structure bending subtly as though pulled by unseen gravity. I fell to my knees, my vision fractured. For a heartbeat, I saw the streets of Kivalina laid out like veins converging into the shape of an immense eye that blinked once, slowly, looking through me. Then, everything went still. The sirens stopped. The fog collapsed inward, soundlessly. I was alone again, kneeling in the middle of the empty street, the rules clutched in my trembling hand. A new line had appeared at the bottom of the page, written in fresh ink. Rule 20. If you've seen it, keep writing. It only forgets you when the story ends. I stayed on my knees for what felt like hours, the wind dead, the fog receded, leaving a town that looked familiar but felt hollow, as though someone had carved the memory of it from my mind and left only the shape behind. The folder in my hand pulsed faintly, the edges curling against themselves like breathing flesh. Rule 20 repeated itself in my head. Keep writing. It only forgets you when the story ends. I returned to my apartment, moving slowly, deliberately, avoiding cracks and the uneven patches of snow outside. Each step was a negotiation. Every breath measured. My reflection in the windows and mirrors no longer mimicked me. It lingered behind, studying, tilting its head, smiling faintly. I obeyed, did not turn away, whispered the rules silently under my breath like prayers. Inside, the desk was waiting. The pages I had not written yet waited for me, blank but warm, as though anticipating. I sat and opened the folder. The lines of ink shimmered faintly, like wet stone. My hand moved on its own, dipping the pen into the bottle, and the first words appeared before I could think to resist. I arrived in Kivalina with nothing but a duffel bag and the hope of escape. The sentences flowed, compelled, inevitable. I wrote everything I had seen, everything I had felt, every step, every shadow, every sound that defied logic. The siren hummed faintly through the walls, a memory of noise more than a sound. The fog pressed against the windows, as if watching, listening. Outside, the reflection of the town rippled in the snow. Shadows moved independently of their sources, angles bent, walls leaned. I wrote, and the act of writing tethered reality, held it from dissolving entirely. My own reflection leaned closer in the window, mouth opening in a slow, deliberate smile. I obeyed, continuing to write, counting the words, the letters, the seconds between my breaths. The rules pulsed in my mind. Rule 1 through 20, repeated silently, guiding me, holding me together. I wrote each experience, each event, each shift in the town and in the fog, recording my obedience and my terror. At some point, I realized the air had changed. The horizon, the black expanse above the town, thinned into something almost like clarity. The wind softened. The faint groaning beneath the snow faded. The reflections stopped moving independently, mirroring only me. I kept writing. The pen did not falter. My hand did not tire. Outside, the town waited silently, neutral now, as though holding its breath. I understood finally that the rules had never been meant to protect me from the entity, the void, or the fog. They were meant to protect reality, from me, from my attention, from the collapse of order that would occur if I stopped. The folder pulsed once faintly, and a new line appeared at the bottom. Rule 21. If you survive, keep writing. It is the only thing that lets the town exist. I continued, my eyes dry, my thoughts sharp, my hand moving endlessly. The fog pressed against the windows, the wind whispered faintly, and my reflection smiled, finally, in unison. And I wrote. I don't know how long I've been writing. The clock above my desk doesn't move anymore. It flickers between impossible hours, the hands twitching like trapped insects. The light outside never changes. It's not day, not night, just an endless gray that hums faintly, like the inside of a dying machine. The town no longer shifts when I write. It responds. Yesterday, if yesterday exists, I tested it. I wrote. The fog receded from Main Street, and when I looked out, it had. The buildings returned, warped but recognizable. The post office, the diner, the church, the snow piled along their roofs like thick, slow-moving breath. I wrote again. The siren was silent. And it was. That silence lasted 3 hours, maybe less. When the siren returned, it was no longer sound, it was vibration, rising from the walls through the floor into my teeth. The window glass trembled. My pen jumped in my hand, leaving jagged, bleeding trails across the paper. The voice came through next. Not through the radio this time, not through the fog, from under the paper. It whispered, faintly at first, a dry rasp like sand through hollow stone. The words were mine. My own voice reading the sentences I'd written but slightly altered. The tone wrong. The rhythm wrong. I kept writing. I couldn't stop. My hand refused to obey. The words spilled faster, shaping themselves into things I didn't choose. Places I'd never seen. Names I didn't know. I wrote of an ocean made of glass and teeth. Of a city beneath it built from the bones of everything that ever looked upward. I wrote of shapes that moved without space, of eyes that bloomed in darkness and fed on the act of being noticed. I wrote until my vision fractured, until my reflection no longer mirrored me at all. It simply watched, and then it moved. It leaned forward, pressing its hand against the inside of the glass. The frost there rippled outward like water. I pressed my palm to it before I could think not to. The surface was warm, and beneath it, the reflection's skin was rough, like sandpaper soaked in salt. It smiled at me. My lips didn't move. The paper under my hand rippled again, ink shifting across the surface. The last line I'd written dissolved, replaced by a new one in that same trembling script that had appeared before. Rule 22, you are not the writer anymore. You are being written. I tore the page away, but the words remained, burned faintly into the desk beneath. My reflection mouthed something I couldn't hear, its teeth too long, its eyes hollow, its jaw unhinging slowly. The radio came alive again. No static this time, only the sound of the sea, vast and close. I stood, walked to the window. The horizon was gone. In its place, a slow-turning spiral of clouds reaching down from the sky, touching the earth, the sea, the church, the station, every structure bending toward its center. The sound grew. Wind, water, breath. All the same, all one. Behind me, the paper fluttered, pages turning on their own. The pen rose from the desk, writing in jerking, erratic strokes. The sound of ink scratching was deafening, faster than human motion. I turned back, slowly. The page read, "Look outside." I obeyed. The spiral had stopped spinning. At its center, something immense and unshaped pressed through the thin membrane of the sky. It didn't fall. It arrived. The world folded around it, light bleeding in reverse, sound inverted. The thing was not color or shadow. It was the idea of depth made visible. My reflection spoke at last, its mouth still moving out of sync. It said, "You wrote it here." And I remembered Madsen's last words before he vanished. "We don't stop it, we only buy time." I turned back to the desk. The pen was still moving. The page read, "Rule 23, to buy time, keep the story alive. Never finish the sentence." I dropped the pen. But the sound of writing continued, soft, steady, endless. From beneath the floorboards, from the walls, from the snow itself. I think the town is still being written, and I think it's learning how to write back. The 8th day began without warning. The horizon was the same gray smear, but the air had weight now, pressing against my chest like water. I moved mechanically, following the streets I had memorized, yet every corner shifted slightly as I passed, subtly enough to make my steps hesitate. The fog no longer receded. It lingered at eye level, coiling around lampposts, crawling over roofs, waiting. The station door creaked behind me, though no one had entered. Inside, the radio whispered faintly, not voices this time, but syllables I almost recognized. I pressed my fingers to the receiver. The sound vibrated through my bones. My reflection appeared in the window, behind the glass, lipless and grinning, its head tilted at impossible angles. I returned to my desk, the folder open, ink shimmering. The rules had multiplied overnight, 24 now, though I had written nothing new. The last one read, "Rule 24. If it calls itself you, do not answer." I felt the words before I saw them. They resonated through the air, a pulse of inevitability. Outside, the wind shifted, northwest this time, but the fog remained static, thick and viscous. At the memorial wall behind the church, the letters glowed faintly. My name pulsed there, deeper than ever, as though engraved into something more than stone. I approached cautiously, counting steps. The wall felt alive, breathing under my gloves, and the names around mine shifted subtly. Something else was being added to the list. A sound came from behind me. Footsteps dragging in the snow. I froze. Rule 16. If you hear someone you love calling you, leave immediately. Do not look back. I obeyed, running without turning, counting my steps, whispering the rules under my breath. The fog pressed against my chest, moving like it had mass, pushing and tugging. Shapes emerged, tall, thin, bending at impossible angles, faces just hints of distortion. They followed, moving in rhythm with my heartbeat, always a step behind, never closing the distance. I reached the station. The front door was gone, replaced by a smooth sheet of gray that shimmered faintly, liquid under the fingers. My reflection appeared behind it, smiling wider than before, gesturing. I obeyed, stepping back, counting my breaths. Inside, the folder waited. The ink on the pages moved like live organisms, forming sentences I had not written. Rule 25, you are being watched. It remembers everything you have ever done. The air grew heavy, vibrating with sound I could not localize. I felt it crawling along my skin, beneath my clothes, in my bones. My reflection moved independently now, pacing behind me, tracing my motions, gesturing to the pages, pointing at the rules. The pen lifted again. I could not control it. The words it wrote were jagged, incomprehensible, but I felt their weight, as though each one carved a new crack in reality. Then, from the snow outside, a new sound emerged. A dragging, soft but insistent, like something too large to be human. I turned to look. The fog parted slightly, revealing footprints that were impossibly long, perfectly straight, leading from the horizon straight toward me. They stopped at the edge of the building, vanishing into nothing. A whisper followed. My voice again, layered, unnatural, like coming from the walls, the desk, the floorboards, the sky itself. You wrote me here, it said. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The rules burned in my mind, every one a lifeline. My hand moved automatically, writing what I saw, what I heard, what I feared. The air pulsed with every word. The town around me, the fog, the sea, even the blackened horizon, it all moved in response. I realized then that I was not the author anymore. The story was writing itself through me. And outside, the fog shifted, forming shapes I could not comprehend, somewhere between buildings, between snow and sky, between thought and reality. They paused as I wrote, patient, waiting for the sentence to end. I did not stop. I could not. Because if I stopped, they would remember me fully. I'm losing track of how long I've been here. The clocks have stopped pretending. The hands twitch but never move forward. The sky doesn't change. The light is the same shade of bruised gray no matter how long I wait. Something about the air feels thinner, stretched. I hear it hum sometimes, like breath drawn through a cracked flute. The snow outside no longer crunches. It sighs, exhaling with each of my steps. The folder on my desk has grown thicker. I haven't added any pages, but every time I open it, there's more. The paper is slick now, soft at the edges, warm to the touch. The words rearrange themselves when I blink. The rules shift order. Some merge, others fade entirely. Last night, or what I call night, Rule 8 was gone. The one about the power going out. I flipped through every page and it simply wasn't there anymore. That terrified me more than anything. Because if the rule no longer exists, does that mean it's safe now, or that it already happened? I tried not to think about it. I tried not to think at all. Instead, I followed what remained. Rule 3, never open a door that knocks more than twice. I've heard it all morning. Soft tapping at the back of the station, rhythmic, patient. 2 knocks, a pause, then 3, then silence, always 3. Always breaking the rule by 1. The air around that door feels colder than the rest of the building. When I stand close to it, the wood pulses, faintly. I can hear something breathing behind it, matching the rhythm of my heartbeat. I went to the window instead. The town is still there, but hollow. No footprints. No lights. No birds. Just shapes. Suggestions of movement that vanish when I try to focus. The fog has a pulse now. I can see it throb gently in the distance, like the surface of a deep, slow ocean. I thought I saw Madsen again. He was standing in front of the church, facing the memorial wall. He was completely still. The snow didn't touch him. The air around him looked thicker, as if he were submerged in something invisible. His head turned slowly, too smoothly, and though I was 3 blocks away, I heard his voice clearly inside my skull. Keep writing. My knees nearly gave out. The voice was calm, deliberate, layered like before. I didn't move, I didn't answer. I just watched him until the fog closed over him again, swallowing him like water. When I returned to the desk, a new page had appeared inside the folder. Only one line in handwriting that wasn't mine. Rule 26. When it starts imitating people you remember, don't listen. They are rehearsal echoes. I tore the page out, but the words stayed on the desk beneath it. Burned into the wood. The ink smelled like salt water. The knocking at the back door grew louder. Not frantic, measured, almost polite. 2 knocks, a pause, then 3. I waited. It came again. This time, after the 3rd knock, something spoke. Not words, just a sound like my own breathing, perfectly mirrored, just on the other side of the door. I stepped back. My reflection in the window smiled again, but it didn't stop there. It reached out, pressing both palms against the inside of the glass. The surface warped slightly, as though soft. My name whispered from everywhere at once, the same tone, same breath. I backed against the desk, hands shaking, whispering the rules. The folder pulsed once, then opened on its own. The pages turned rapidly, blurring until they stopped on a single new line that bled fresh ink. Rule 27. When the knocking stops, it means you've been let out. But you are not the one who leaves. The room began to tremble. Not an earthquake. Something slower, deeper, like the entire structure was exhaling. The light dimmed. The knocking stopped. I froze. The silence that followed felt heavier than the sound. Every instinct in me screamed not to move. But from the window, I saw my reflection step backward, away from the glass and turn toward the door. And then I heard footsteps, mine, moving from behind me, crossing the floor. I didn't turn. I didn't need to. The sound stopped just behind my shoulder. I could feel breath on my neck, slow and steady, perfectly synchronized with my own. Then my voice whispered softly in my ear, "You can stop writing now." I clenched my eyes shut. I didn't move. I kept breathing. The rules echoed in my head like a mantra. Rule 20. If you've seen it, keep writing. It only forgets you when the story ends. So I kept writing, and the thing wearing my voice kept whispering, and I don't know which of us is still real anymore. I think I've been awake for days, but there's no proof anymore. The clocks on the wall twitch and reset. My wristwatch reads the same number no matter how long I stare. The fog outside pulses in a rhythm that feels like it's counting me. Every surface in the station sweats a thin film of moisture. Salt dries in white streaks on the glass. The floorboards swell and creak, breathing. I keep writing. It's the only thing that still feels like movement. The words appear on the page a half second before I finish them, as though the thought has already been anticipated. Sometimes I stop mid-sentence just to see if it will complete itself. It always does. Last night, I tried to destroy the folder. I threw it into the stove and watched it curl in the flames, but the sound it made wasn't paper burning. It was closer to a sigh. The smoke rose in long, deliberate shapes that formed letters in the air. When I turned back to the desk, the folder was there again, slightly thicker. A new rule had appeared. Rule 28. Do not attempt to erase what has already been written. You cannot unmake what has read you. I felt something move under the floor then. A slow shift, a scraping of wood and stone, like the foundation itself was turning over. Dust fell from the ceiling in lazy spirals. The light flickered, then steadied. The sound stopped. I thought it was over until I looked at the window. My reflection wasn't there. The glass showed the empty room behind me, my chair, my desk, the folder, but no me. When I moved closer, I saw faint distortions rippling through the glass like something submerged. I reached out. The surface was cold, but it pushed back slightly as if something pressed from the other side. Then my reflection returned, but wrong. It wasn't copying me anymore. It stood still, head tilted, eyes moving on their own. Its mouth opened wider than mine could, the slow, deliberate. The sound that came through was wind, layered with words. "You're late," it said. The voice was thin, stretched, as if pulled across water. I didn't answer. The reflection smiled, reached forward, and touched the inside of the glass. Frost bloomed outward from the point of contact, spreading across the pane in seconds, patterns branching like veins. The air temperature dropped instantly. My breath fogged white. The radio came alive again, filling the silence with the low hiss of the sea. Beneath it, faint voices murmured in unison. I leaned close and caught fragments. The tide, the turning. He's still writing. My reflection stepped backward, vanishing into the frost. The window cleared. The sound faded. When I looked down, the folder had opened itself again. Rule 29, if it starts speaking through mirrors, leave the room immediately. It's learning the shape of your voice. I tried to leave. The door wouldn't move. The handle turned freely. But the space beyond it was gone, a solid wall of gray. The air inside the station thickened, each breath a small struggle. I went to the back door. Same thing. I was trapped. I sat at the desk, the rules swimming before my eyes. Some of the older ones had changed wording slightly. Others were gone altogether. I didn't remember what had replaced them. The siren began again, distant at first, then close enough to shake the walls. The sound had grown stranger. Less mechanical, more organic, the pitch quivering like a throat struggling to speak. The floor vibrated beneath my feet, steady, rhythmic. Through the window, the fog churned violently. I saw shapes inside it, large and slow, like whales turning in deep water. Every time I blinked, they were closer. The station lights dimmed, flickered once, then died. And in the dark, a single voice, my own, whispered from every direction, "You forgot a rule." I turned toward the sound. My reflection was back, but now it filled the entire window, face pressed against the glass from the other side. Its eyes were wide, hollow, black. The folder slid across the desk on its own. A new line bled through the last page, the ink wet and breathing. Rule 30. When you can no longer tell which side of the glass you're on, stop looking. It means the story has noticed you. The siren's pitch climbed until it was all I could hear. The floor shook. The window began to ripple like liquid. I reached for the pen anyway. My hand was trembling, but I wrote the only thing I could think to write. I'm still here. The sound stopped instantly. The air settled. The fog outside froze mid-motion, perfectly still. Then the reflections smiled and mouthed something I couldn't hear. And the pen in my hand kept writing, even after I stopped moving. When I woke, the pen was still moving. My hand lay slack beside it, fingers twitching in rhythm with each stroke. The page beneath had filled with lines I didn't recognize. Dense, coiling characters that weren't English, maybe not language at all. The ink shimmered faintly, alive like something seen through heat. My reflection was gone from the window. In its place, the glass pulsed in slow intervals, faintly luminous. The station's clock ticked backward now. Every time it reached midnight, it clicked once and began again from 11:59. The air smelled of metal and salt. I tried to step outside, but the door opened onto nothing. Not darkness, just absence. The horizon was erased. The town had vanished, replaced by a smooth, endless gray that looked both near and impossibly distant. The radio hummed behind me. I turned it off. It kept humming. Beneath the static, a slow, deliberate voice formed words I couldn't ignore. Read it. The sound came from everywhere, the walls, the floor, the air vibrating inside my lungs. Read what you wrote. I looked down. The folder had grown thick, swollen, pages fused together by the ink that still bled between them. I hesitated. The voice didn't repeat itself, but I could feel it waiting, so I obeyed. The letters rearranged as I watched, forming words only long enough for me to understand before shifting again. They described everything around me. The empty town, the weight in the air, the gray horizon, but slightly wrong. The descriptions didn't match my movements, they anticipated them. When I looked left, the page already contained the detail of my turning head. When I blinked, it noted the blink. When I inhaled, it recorded the breath. It wasn't documentation, it was dictation. The realization came slowly. The story wasn't predicting what I'd do. It was deciding. I slammed the folder shut, heart hammering. The sound echoed strangely, bouncing off invisible walls. The fog outside stirred in response, thickening near the glass until I could no longer see through it. Then came a knock. 3 soft taps on the window pane. I froze. The fog swirled. A handprint bloomed against the glass. Long fingers, skin gray, veins black like ink. The fingers moved, slow and deliberate, tracing something across the frost. A single word formed, reversed from my side, but legible all the same. Open. I backed away. The radio hissed louder. My voice, again, unmistakably mine, came through in broken fragments. You shouldn't have looked at it. It doesn't like being observed. The reflection's voice layered under mine, half a second delayed. You shouldn't have looked at it. It was mimicking the recording perfectly, word for word, even the cadence of my breathing. I tore the plug from the wall. The static continued. The sound wasn't coming from the device anymore. It was in the room, vibrating through the air like resonance from a tuning fork. The folder twitched once on the desk. Then it began to open again on its own. I stepped back, but every time I blinked it was closer, as though the distance between us had shortened invisibly. Pages turned rapidly, stopping at a fresh one near the end. The pen lifted. It began writing in my handwriting. Rule 31. If the writing continues after you've stopped, leave immediately. It means it's no longer using your hand. I stumbled for the door again. The handle was cold, slick with condensation. I pulled hard, and this time it gave way, just slightly, enough to let through a sliver of the gray outside. The fog pressed inward like liquid, thick and slow, bending the air around it. The moment it touched the threshold, the lights went out. Everything became sound. My heartbeat, the radio, the slow scrape of something large moving outside. When the lights flickered back, the fog had receded. The station was smaller somehow, walls closer, ceiling lower. My reflection had returned to the glass, but there were 2 of them now. Both moved a half second out of sync with me. They smiled. The folder lay open again, but the ink was dry this time. Fresh lines etched themselves into the paper like scratches on metal. Rule 32, do not stop reading. The space between words is where it enters. My throat tightened. I didn't understand what it meant, but I felt something shift behind me. Subtle, patient, waiting. I turned, slow. There was nothing there, just the sound of the pen clicking once by itself. And then a new line appeared, written in a smaller hand I didn't recognize. You are almost finished. The words burned into the page. I froze, my fingers hovering above the folder as though it might strike me if I touched it. You are almost finished. Outside, the fog had grown thicker, crawling across the windows like a living skin. The town, if it still existed, no longer mattered. Even the horizon felt like a memory, fading. The air pressed against my chest with every inhale. My reflection in the window didn't mimic me anymore. It waited, tilted forward slightly, watching, calculating. The pen jumped in the folder again. It didn't glide smoothly across the page. It scraped, carving, pulling something from the surface of reality into ink. I wanted to stop it. I tried to stop it. My hand rose, trembling, to cover it. But the ink flowed faster, and I realized with sudden, hollow certainty I was no longer in control. I glanced at the radio. Static filled the room, low, omnipresent. But beneath it, I could hear fragments of my own voice, stretched and layered, repeating over and over, almost finished, almost finished, almost finished. A knock came at the door. One sharp, deliberate strike. I froze. Rule 27 flashed in my mind. When the knocking stops, it means you've been let out. But you are not the one who leaves. I didn't move. Then a second knock, and a third. My heartbeat synced with the rhythm. Something waited outside, patient, pressing against the threshold. The fog shifted and thickened at the edges of the station. Shapes moved just beyond it, too large, too angular, too impossible to comprehend. The reflection in the window raised a hand, slower than I could move, and pressed it against the glass. Frost bloomed outward in fractals. The pattern resembled an eye, huge, black, bottomless, staring directly at me. The pen stopped suddenly. The folder trembled, and a new line formed in jagged, uneven letters. Rule 33. To finish is to vanish. To continue is to exist. I understood what it meant before the words fully settled. The story wasn't mine. I was inside it. Every word I'd written, every rule I'd memorized, every step I'd taken, all of it was part of the construct holding reality together around me. And if I stopped, if I let go, I would vanish. A sudden wind rattled the station windows. The fog surged inward, carrying shapes with it, thin, elongated, impossibly high, folding over themselves. My reflection didn't mimic me anymore. It stepped backward into the glass, fully disappearing inside. The surface rippled and reformed, smooth, reflective, but empty. The pen lifted again. My hand followed. My body obeyed mechanically. I wrote. I don't know what I wrote. I only know that each sentence felt heavier than the last, like it was pulling reality into itself. Then the sound of the knocking changed. No longer a door, it came from inside the walls, the floor, the ceiling, the snow outside. A slow, rhythmic tapping, like something walking just beneath the thin veneer of the world. I whispered the rules, counting them in my mind, letting them tether me to the act of writing. Rule 20. If you've seen it, keep writing. It only forgets you when the story ends. I wrote faster. The folder thickened. The ink shimmered. Shapes moved in the fog outside, pulling themselves closer to the station, stretching toward me. I wrote words I didn't know I could form. Sentences that outlined the impossible angles of their bodies. The pulsing darkness behind the gray, the sound of the siren twisted into living form. And then, just as my fingers ached to the point of numbness, the fog outside receded slightly. The knocking stopped. Silence. Perfect. Heavy silence. I dared to look up. The horizon remained gray, but the shapes were gone. My reflection had returned, normal this time, mirroring me perfectly. I breathed. My knees gave way. The folder lay on the desk, calm, still. A new line appeared at the bottom of the last page. Rule 34. The story continues as long as the writer exists. The writer continues as long as the story demands. I don't know how long I've been here, or if here even has meaning anymore. I only know the pen is still in my hand. I only know the words continue to form. I write. I continue. I exist. The gray outside hasn't changed. Hours, days, maybe years. It doesn't matter anymore. The fog pulses slowly, a living rhythm under the surface of everything. I have stopped trying to leave the station. The doors open onto nothing. The streets outside fold back on themselves. Even if I ran, I'd remain inside the story. The folder lies on the desk, thicker now than ever. Each page vibrates faintly, a subtle hum that I feel in my bones. I dare not touch the edges with bare fingers. They curl, shifting slightly under my gaze as though anticipating my movement. The pen never stops. Even when I rest my hand, the words continue to form. I see sentences appear in the air, then on the page, then carved into the desk surface itself. I've stopped keeping track of the rules. They repeat in my mind without prompting. Some have changed. Some are gone. Others have multiplied, forming new patterns I can't comprehend, but one persists above all others. Keep writing. My reflection no longer exists as a separate entity. Sometimes I catch glimpses in the window, shapes, hints of eyes, a mouth that moves when I don't. Other times the glass is a mirror of nothing at all, reflecting only the room, the folder, the pen. I've noticed that when I falter, even for a second, the room shifts. The ceiling tilts imperceptibly, the walls bend, the floor swells. I know that the story is aware, waiting for me to stop, measuring the hesitation. Last night, or whatever time it is, I wrote something I didn't understand. A line in jagged letters formed itself before my eyes. It remembers every word, every hesitation, every glance. Do not look away. The ink pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat of its own. I obeyed, staring at the words until they faded slightly into the paper. The silence outside is heavier than ever. I can hear faint movements in the fog, subtle and deliberate, like the world is breathing just beyond the edges of perception. I know they are there. I don't look. I write. Every line, every word, every stroke of the pen pulls the town, the fog, the horizon, even the air itself into a fragile alignment. Without it, everything bends, twists, collapses. I have seen glimpses of the collapse, streets folding onto themselves, the sea rising into the sky, shapes stretching impossibly, angles that should not exist. I keep writing. I no longer know my own voice. The whispers in the radio, in the walls, in the folder, They speak in tones that I recognize and cannot. My voice layers over itself endlessly. Sometimes it comes from the window, repeating the words I've already written before I've finished them. The pen lifts again. My fingers follow. The folder hums beneath my hand. I write. And I know that if I stop, even for a single second, the shapes outside, the fog, the world itself, will remember me fully. I do not stop, I continue, I exist, I write. The sound began again just before dawn, or what I still call dawn, though no light ever changes anymore. A slow, rhythmic thud, like a pulse reverberating through the walls. It wasn't outside this time, it came from beneath. The station floorboards bowed inward, sighing with each beat. Dust lifted, hovered, then fell again in perfect time with the sound. I didn't want to look, but I always look. Between the boards, thin cracks widened into seams, black and wet. Something moved there, slow, deliberate, not quite fluid. The ink, the same black ink that fills the folder. It was coming up. I took a step back, but the pen was still in my hand, moving on its own. The tip scratched across the paper, carving shapes that matched the sound from beneath. My handwriting no longer resembled itself. It looked older, familiar, but not mine. The folder whispered when I touched it, not metaphorically, real whispering, breath against skin. It repeated the same phrase over and over, faint and hollow. The writer feeds the page feeds the world. I stared until the words blurred. The air thickened with salt and static. The radio clicked alive again, voices overlapping, countless versions of my own tone, each slightly off. "Still writing?" one of them asked. "Yes," another replied. "Good," said a third. "If you stop, it forgets how to end." The ink under the floor bubbled, pushing upward. A small fissure split between my boots. From it, steam rose, cold, metallic, humming. I could see the movement below, vast and layered, like veins spreading across the earth. I flipped through the folder. Every page pulsed faintly. Between some, I saw movement, as if depth existed inside the paper. The words were no longer static. They crawled, rearranged, devoured each other, forming new sentences. On the last page, fresh ink appeared. Rule 35. The ink beneath is not liquid. It is memory. Do not touch it unless you are ready to be remembered. The floor shook once, violently. The station lights flickered, burst, and darkness swallowed everything. I could hear the ocean outside, though the nearest coast was miles away. The sound rolled closer, heavier, until it pressed against the walls like a living thing. I reached for the lantern. My reflection flickered in its glass, two of me side by side, one slightly delayed. It smiled when I didn't. The pen continued to move. I could feel every motion inside my arm, like tendons tightening under someone else's control. The story wrote itself faster now, the lines harder to follow. I caught glimpses, descriptions of me sitting here, reading these words, noticing these details, then deeper, writing about you, the reader, the observer. The fog outside shifted again. The shapes were closer than ever, pressing against the window, stretching the glass. I could see details now, hands too long, faces too smooth, eyes like holes cut into existence. They didn't breathe. They listened. I don't remember standing, but I was suddenly at the window. The glass vibrated beneath my palm. The figures leaned forward as one, silent. My reflection behind them mirrored me again, perfectly, until it whispered without sound, moving lips that spoke only one thing: write faster. I stumbled back to the desk. The folder had already turned to a new page. The ink shimmered like an open wound. Rule 36. When you begin to suspect the reader can see you, do not acknowledge them. The story feeds on attention. My hands shook, the words blurred. I could feel the attention, the watching, like heat behind the glass of the world. The knocking started again, this time in rhythm with my heartbeat. Faster, louder. Something inside the fog began to take shape. I don't know how long I have left. I don't know if time still exists. I only know the pen hasn't stopped. The ink beneath the floorboards breathes with me. Every line I write feels like blood leaving the body, and somewhere outside the glass, in the impossible gray, something enormous stirs, waiting for the story to end.